fucking catcall you, bro.
You know what?
Full
Fuck you.
Oh, you just called
He reverse catcalled you. Your catcalling will just cancel it out.
It's Rachel.
Yeah.
Go home.
Do I have to come over there and suck your dick?
You have enough good boy points?
Wow.
I not about good boy points. This one's on the house.
Communism according to charity.
No charity here.
Comedy
boys. Unless you're getting a tax break.
A tax break on suck
deduct
points.
my taxes. Deduct my virginity from taxes.
Losses this semester. Virginity.
Pop my boy pussy cherry.
Thank you.
So, was that a yes?
Do you accept, bitch?
Do you accept my challenge? I pulled out.
I pulled out.
Challenge?
Pull out. Do it. Get it.
Sure.
Grab it. Do it.
I think I'm uncomfortable with that one.
Sorry.
I'm gonna go with that.
Oh, Chris, you just suck today.
No! Shut up! Do it.
Okay, back to the topic list.
Do it. Do it. Fucking do it, pussy. Do it!
Do it.
I think we'll skip that one.
Do it. Good.
I think we'll skip that one.
We already did that
baby. I
one.
do it, though.
What do you think, Chris?
The sixth one.
The sixth one?
Wait.
I haven't
Do
looked.
one below that.
Today.
If Sean was here, you should probably do that one.
Sean, how do you feel about Kafka traps?
What's a Kafka trap?
Fuck is
Oh,
that? I don't even know what that is.
Okay, so a Kafka trap is like a rhetorical device where you set.
I'm gone.
It's like when you're in an argument
Sounds
and you
familiar.
set it up so that the
They're
person
always
is
wrong.
in a situation they can't escape.
Oh, okay.
So
like,
like
if
the
you
Lincoln
say-
does.
So like
say-
if I throw
You
them
must
into
be-
a metaphorical pit and tell them to put lotion on their skin.
Wait, where's the I beg your fucking pardon.
I was doing okay.
What was that?
Have you not seen the movie?
No, apparently not.
No.
Silence of the Lambs.
Nope.
I have not.
No.
Really?
I
I
have
have not.
not.
the lotion in
I have not.
Actually, no, wait, I think I
puts
have.
the
I just
lotion
didn't
in
pay
the
attention to
basket.
fucking lotion.
And then she finds a fucking
part of
ball
a
and she
movie.
starts
No.
screaming, and then she gets hosed, and then he holds the dog. Have none of you seen Silence
I
of the
have
Lambs?
seen it, I
No,
just
Animal
didn't find
Lecter, but I
lotion
just
in
haven't
the
seen it.
aspect of the movie.
Now I have to watch Silence of the Lambs as well. Thank you, Brandon.
Like I'd
Wait,
rather
why did
watch
that come
that
back?
than
I always-
another time.
Oh,
back
Kafka
and get
traps.
crushed.
Right, I was gonna look that up.
That's your problem. See,
'Cause I-
It's
I-
like the
At
Lincoln
least
Douglas
it's some-
you
argument
has to
way
believe
back
it.
I'm pretty
when.
sure.
you need to lower your point of equilibrium.
I think.
Someone needs to believe.
Because what does it mean if
In
something's
engineering, no one does.
Kafka-esque?
So I need to.
It's when you're accused of something and your denial is taken as evidence.
Like if I say, Brandon, you're
I
paranoid.
know what you're saying. I know what you're
You're
saying.
paranoid.
I understand.
Oh, and then you're like,
And I
no,
can't
I'm
say
not.
I'm
No,
not
I'm not.
It's like that's
no,
what a
I'm not.
paranoid
It's like,
person would
yeah.
say.
And then
It's
if I
like,
say
I'm not
yes,
paranoid.
then-
I'm not.
It's like if I deny it.
Okay, so the only option
Or
is
if
to
I
shoot
say-
myself. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
if,
to
like,
walk away from the argument.
Yeah, but
Because once you get
yeah,
into
but then
the
you're a
trap, you
bitch.
can't get
Oh,
out.
man.
Yeah.
It's either you're paranoid or you're a bitch. Those are the two options.
Or you're argumentative. And you say, no, I'm not. And I say, yeah, you are. And then it turns into an argument.
I know you are, but what am I?
Ooh, got him.
Checkmate.
Those sort of traps.
cunt.
You know, do you think it's a valid technique to use in an argument, though? To like pin someone in like such a way that the argument just goes in circles.
No, because it usually ends up frustrating the other person and defeats the point of the argument.
Yeah.
I think.
If the point of the argument is to win, then maybe. But if the point of the argument is to like actually
It's to
figure
actually
out what's
convince
right,
people.
yeah,
Yeah.
then no.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the purpose of the argument.
If you're just like trying to be a cunt, then yeah.
It would be interesting
That's a
to
great
see how that
strategy.
played
It's
out.
a great choice if you just want to be
Are
a
we
cunt.
finding out? We could squeeze and slowly like do the thing.
What are you staring at? What are you doing, Chris?
Boys!
You look like you're on fucking crack and you haven't had it in 2 days and you're starting to panic.
Quick, Chris, start itching everywhere.
Between the
No,
two
like he
of us.
almost had that exact like needs to itch mannerism, but wasn't scratching. That's what it was.
You hang out with too many cocaine
Yeah,
addicts.
And you're like
Handwriting.
whispering to Dana, and you're like twiddling with something, and you're like,
The vigorous white knuckle handwriting.
They don't understand us. Understand our struggles.
Guys are actually the correct.
They don't know us. They don't know what we've been through. Us,
You as a
me,
crack addict?
the singularity,
The God King.
the one true being.
crack, or his crack dealer?
Krakatoa.
Krakatoa.
Got him.
Killed. Killed.
Oh, you guys feel like
360
arguing?
no-scope.
No.
Sure.
I
Yes.
enjoy that.
Let's do it.
Are you sure? Because I think this is one you'll like.
Okay.
Yeah, but like I can't like talk. No, like,
I'll talk for you. Don't worry. I'm sure.
You know, I'm sure Andrew will talk.
I
for
have a
this topic.
Wait, if we're
potential
gonna
of
argue, we
3
can vote
things
more.
in my head that this could be.
Yeah.
I want to
I'll
see
grab
if it
you
is
too.
before.
Well, okay,
Sorry,
take guesses. What do you think it is?
An argument.
Oh,
Something-
look at
something
that!
that
100%.
we're split on.
I call
Because
it.
that's why it'll be
Technically the
argument.
truth, but you're a bitch.
The Jews did 9/11.
Call me.
That's not an argument, Andrew.
Is it politically based?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yes.
what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
This fucking 20
Take a
questions
guess.
bullshit.
The Jews.
Abortion or gun rights.
don't make them
Or-
If you say Saudi Arabia, I'm gonna have some fun.
Yeah, don't give him that.
They didn't kill
Don't
him.
let him have that. I'll just side with whatever
Turkey did
he
it.
says.
Turkey did it.
No.
It was the
did it.
Jews.
Oh, it's a fucking conspiracy. Turkey did it.
Turkey did it to free the Saudis.
Oh, you fucking genius.
Serious thing, like Turkey
To
wouldn't
drive
have
down
a
oil
reason
prices.
Saudis.
Yeah, they would. Because then they're out of the spotlight, and the Armenian genocide goes unnoticed.
It's already unnoticed, damn it.
Shank got
It goes
I
even
got
more
the water for
unnoticed.
everyone, but no.
Cenk Uyghur, the legend.
Opacity
Wait,
goes
have
from
the
98
legend.
to 99.
Legend.
Why'd I
Getting
vacuum?
ready. He is poised.
That's
What
how
is-
you
what
make
is
the
this
crowd
thing
hate
we
you.
feel chopping?
Sorry, I
Yeah.
spilled
I
water.
probably, if it's anything
it was an
involving military,
accident.
you can go yes.
No, I
When
forgive
Sean
you.
said yes.
I actually don't stay that up to date on the Middle East.
Yeah, well, neither do I, so.
Only, obviously, only
Nobody does.
You got a better
brought-
shot
yeah,
than
no.
I do.
Because I knew
It's too,
I was
it's too
gonna be
confusing.
talking
Yeah, it's way too confusing.
Wow.
These brown people hate these
Wow.
other brown people.
Wow,
I don't know
Martin.
what's going. And then they hit the Jews.
Yeah.
Everyone hates
The brown people hate the other brown
That's
people,
so
but
dumb.
they hate the Jews more than
Oh
they
my
hate each
God,
other.
that's
That's what I'm going with.
Most days
All right,
anyway.
hit.
Most days.
Go.
So Sean, am I right?
It's close.
Turkey did it.
Sean, go for it.
What?
Go off.
On what?
Explain why Turkey has no reason to do it.
To drive down oil prices, to drive a wedge between the Americans and the Saudis. Turkey did it. Perfect motive.
So here's
Right
the
there.
thing.
Boom. Bada bing,
Like,
bada boom.
I actually
Done.
feel like I've heard that talking point somewhere, but
I hope
don't
not.
Yeah.
It's bullshit.
No, I feel like I actually heard somebody say, no, not that Turkey actually did it, but like
But it was staged.
that the information that Turkey gave is like we shouldn't take it like 100%, something like that.
Well, I
I
mean,
don't think we should
I
trust
think
anyone in this.
I think the
because
information
everyone's
Turkey
lying.
gave is very
Yeah.
credible because they did it. So
Oh, okay.
There you go. Simple as that.
yeah, perfect.
Okay,
Easy.
well let's give Sean a platform.
Yeah,
he hasn't
go ahead.
been
Please,
he
Sean,
hasn't
please.
been
Like a
on
floating
this
platform?
plane of existence in quite a long time.
So let's make him mad.
Oh no.
No, so
No,
Sean,
Sean
I'm angry.
is a composed
Sean.
human.
go.
Basically, Turkey doesn't really have a super incentive to do this because they both work with the U.S. Although Turkey doesn't really like Saudi Arabia, like they wouldn't like the ramifications if they actually got found out for like faking it. Also, they didn't fake it. Like Khashoggi's clearly
He's dead. He's clearly dead.
No,
and
no,
like
they didn't fake it, but they're the ones who killed him.
so like there's no like the evidence that's in the public domain just inherently refutes that because the individuals who killed him came from Saudi Arabia. There's no way Turkey has operatives operating in Saudi Arabia who then fly from Saudi Arabia to this place and then fly back to Saudi Arabia. Or at least not those many that are actually guarding the prince. Like, if hypothetically they did have these as operatives, like, they would probably just use them to kill MBS.
Can I refute this?
Are you sure it's
there.
something about MBS?
I didn't see you in Vietnam.
I was there. I put the plastic over his head. The turkey told me to do it. Okay.
Yeah,
I heard the
I-
Turkey
Not
was
turkey,
behind
as in the turkey that Trump pardoned today. That turkey. He told me to do. What was it, Karen? There's
He's on,
pea
he's
or
on
carrot.
something here, Sean.
Which
No,
one?
Sean,
Did
tell us about your opinions on the matter. You said the Saudi Arabia thing would get you going. Tell us about
Basically, United States is just never going to do anything in retaliation because we need Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia way too much.
Facts.
And
It's bullshit.
It's really sad because it's like, yeah, we're totally okay with like human rights abuses and bombing the living fuck out of Yemen, just killing journalists just because they don't like us. Because we like that oil money / soft power influence in the Middle East. And it's like really bad because it's literally like we give them money so that they can manipulate our interests.
It's dumb. But
Yes.
America.
Man, I can't believe
What
Turkey's
if-
pulling all these strings.
What if we annex Saudi Arabia?
Boom.
I'm okay. I don't want it.
Literally.
Make it an
It's
ocean.
more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah.
Make it
Nope.
in an
Because they're the
ocean, come
people
on.
who they're the that is the place
You're
where
on board.
catcalling originated.
That's
Am I?
true.
Damn.
I mean, if everything's an ocean,
They called
I
it
kinda have
goat
to be on
calling
board.
over there, but then we
There we
translated
go.
it to cat calling. Like,
Did you ever read
Yeah.
Persepolis?
It's lovely.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
have
Do you remember, like, she went back to Iran,
Quite
Saudi
pleasant.
Arabia.
No, I don't have
but
anything
the
against Saudi
Saudis were moving
just
into
don't know.
Iran.
Okay, well, yeah.
But, like, a Saudi Arabian man just, like, catcalled her just because she was just, like, walking around with a can of Coca-Cola, and that was apparently, like, a tell that she might be a hooker.
Her ankles were showing. She was a whore.
I think that was the
I think it
reason
was
given.
the wind. It would have just been the wind, Chris.
Just the humidity determined it. Just
I caught a glimpse of her cheek, of her nose, like the bridge of her nose,
Ooh,
through her
ooh.
veil.
And Chris just like Chris had
Oh
money.
boy.
you ready to be going.
Chris had an erection that lasted for 5 days.
Wait, that is
He
not
was
healthy.
he was too embarrassed to contact his doctor.
Yeah, you know what else isn't healthy? Showing the bridge of your nose when you
Yeah,
should be
come on.
fully covered.
Yeah, you might
Facts.
get
Yeah,
stoned.
Cassie.
Really,
So
the amount
Sean,
of blood in
Sean,
her-
how do you
Sorry.
feel about the fact that we invaded Iraq in response to 9/11 when the people were actually Saudi Arabian and living in Patterson, New Jersey?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, boys.
Represent
So,
Jersey strong.
Jersey.
So, post 9/11 United States was just like when the 9/11 attacks happened. The ridiculous amount of international support for us literally meant we could do whatever the fuck we wanted. Like this is a time frame, like to put it in perspective, like Russia offered to give us troops to just do whatever the fuck we wanted with. Like that's not going to happen today. Like the amount of international support for whatever the fuck we wanted to do, like we could pretty much do what we wanted. And so like it was one of those things where it's like we needed to do something, but didn't know what the fuck that was, and we weren't gonna fuck with Saudi Arabia. So like we went one country over because there was the Iraq-Iran war that made it very convenient to just like go in. Like I don't have enough. This problem of like the United States education system. Like if it's anything recent, we don't teach it. So like, I don't have enough basis on why we chose to go to Iraq.
From what I've heard, the information that was given at the time, it like looking back now, we can say yeah, it was a fucking stupid idea. But at the time, what they told Bush, it seemed like we should. Like the information that they gave him at the time seemed good, but now obviously we can look back and be like, oh, Bush was retarded, but I mean,
Yeah.
that's not
All
necessarily.
you C
Hindsight is
students, all you A
20/20.
and B students, you're gonna grow up to be great people. All you C students, you can be the president of the United States.
So the thing is that like the United States constantly has a problem going into countries and thinking we're gonna have like quick operations, and we don't. And the other thing,
Wasn't the Iraqi
imagine we're
not
invasion
true.
done and
Yeah,
over with in
yeah.
3 days?
yeah, the mission
And then we
accomplished.
spent the next
the mission
7
accomplished.
years,
3 weeks.
Yeah,
but
not 3 days, but yeah,
3
The
weeks,
mission
and then we
accomplished.
spent the next 7 years
Just cleaning up.
Well, so the thing is, like, we don't actually clean up.
Well, the operation was complete after 3 weeks. Then we started a new operation. That one went on a little bit longer.
The 3 week the destruction of 3 weeks was so intense. It took that much long. It took so long
We're
to clean
far
up.
better at killing things than fixing them.
America.
USA, support our troops.
Yeah, I should have just let them fix it themselves, and then nothing happens, and they all die.
Just fill the holes with sand. What
There
the fuck
you
are they
go.
gonna
Yeah,
do?
exactly.
Did you guys ever see American Sniper? Or read it?
No.
I heard it was good.
It sounds familiar.
It's a book.
Yes.
It's the movie is
Of the
based
same
on
name?
his autobiography, but the
Called
movie,
American Sniper.
yeah, it was a
God.
memoir, truthfully, but it was the movie actually goes beyond the scope of the book
The
because
scope of the
Chris-
book. The scope of the book.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris Kyle actually died.
Are you just pointing that one out? That was a
It
good
like
one.
followed Chris Kyle after he finished the memoir because he actually died. When he was killed by a Vietnam War vet who had PTSD.
Really?
Okay.
Sorry, that's how the movie ends. He dies.
Oh, rip.
Sean,
Wow, huge spoiler.
what is your opinion on
Yeah,
entitlement
it's-
reform?
Do it.
Okay, never mind. I don't have anything specific. I just know that's like the buzzword that I hear all the time.
Like entitlement in terms of like Social Security or,
I just enjoy that he like
It's a bubble that's gonna pop.
worshippers himself.
Like a pimple on the face of juvenile America.
That was.
Adolescent
So I've
America,
had a
the
couple
fucking
conversations
acne,
about
it's gonna
entitlement
spill all over
reform.
the place and there'll be
Beautiful-
pus,
Beautiful metaphor, Martin.
pus
I mean,
everywhere.
I just feel like
don't
no
know
one
what
is
I'm
gonna
saying.
touch it because it's just like too unpopular.
Picturing so many things.
There's a very big divide in the context of like how to reform it.
It's another 5
So, like-
days of trying to calm down right there.
phrase it
Make it
appropriately.
6.
The idea of like saving is like inherently a luxury that's afforded to the wealthier classes. Because like if I don't have money to like afford
Yeah,
basic
yeah.
necessities, I can't just put like I'm not going to opt to like skip dinner to save money.
I do
So
that. But I mean
most people
now,
don't.
obviously.
That's how millionaires do it.
Yeah, that's why they have so much money. They don't
That's
eat.
why
So basically, like entitlement reform, like the entitlement process, or like Social Security in this case, like the contributions that are put in are like savings that are built in for individuals who might not be able to develop savings.
Yeah, but it's
And so-
not enough.
Yes.
for everyone.
The problem with Social Security in its current asset or current like stake is like one, the Social Security relies on a constantly aging population where there's always more people who are younger than older. But in the way in which like the baby boom affected things, and the way in which like an industrialized economy doesn't continue to grow, it makes it very difficult to sustain a program. Plus, with medical advances, where it used to be people die in their like 70s, so they were only on for like maybe 5 to 15 years. Now, since people are like typically living into their 80s, it extends that time frame under which people use it. So like,
But the baby boomers were also alive during a time in American history where there was prosperity abounded, and they had every opportunity to save for retirement.
Yeah,
And like now that but like at the same time they're also opting to rely on Social Security in their retirement instead of on their savings,
So
as it should have been.
okay. So the problem with that, like this analysis is true. The problem is that like the cutoff year is like I want to say the 1980s. Up until the 1980s, the real wage rate was increasing like in context of the economy growing. So like although like businesses were making more, individual wage earners were also earning more. But post 1980s, what we saw was an astronomical increase in the amount of like profits being derived in the business sector, but not actually getting like distributed down to workers. So the real wage rate has been stagnant for like 30 years. And that's why people are like, oh, like people used to be able to like afford a house and like also have savings and a car off like their like standard job. It's like, yeah, because back then like the real wage rate was higher. Although like maybe
minimum wage would increase with inflation and as money was more and more.
No. The minimum wage wasn't like
I'd say
that.
minimum wage, but I mean like wages were proportional to
The
the amount
livable
of money.
wage.
Yeah, the living wage is like I think it's a good way. I don't know the proper terminology, but like living
Yeah.
wage is like more applicable in this case, where it's like the amount you need to live off of is much lower, and so like let's say you made $100 and living wage is $50, that $50 is like savings or whatever. But nowadays it's like the living wage is like $150, but you only make $100, and you're like, what the fuck do I do? This isn't like a systemic problem for like everyone, but like a large amount of people are in this. Or for example, like it's not common that like without higher education you're going to be making more than a living wage.
Martin, didn't you write something about this last year? I remember reading something.
I wrote something. It was more on minimum wage and
Yeah, but it was
very
like the
low
living-
wage workers, and how they were like people were opting to not actually like take care of themselves just because they needed to afford rent.
Yeah.
And like they would opt to have very, very bad food. They would not take care of their health. Like they would just like because instead
I got this gunshot wound, but I gotta get to work.
Yeah, exactly. Just put duct tape over it instead
If you
of,
go to the
but it's
hospital,
because-
it's like, bruh, now I
They're
don't
essentially
have
lowering
enough
their own standards
place
of
to
living.
live. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they would lower
either
their
heal my
standards of
gunshot
living.
wound or I have a house.
They would lower their standards of living because their wage was not proportional to how they can live now.
Yeah.
Because as the cost of living was going up, the wage didn't move with it, so they were stagnating, and then they eventually had to keep moving into lower and lower houses. That's why we see a lot of people now. That's why we see a lot of people now who live maybe 4 people to a room, just because like it costs that much to have a room and still have savings. Because otherwise, if I wanted to live alone, I'm just gonna use Hoboken as an example because I'm familiar with
I
it.
thought you were gonna say something about hobos.
If I wanted to live in Hoboken, I would need to be making $1,000 a month roughly to have like a mid-range apartment all to myself.
I mean, I feel like Hoboken's not the best example because it also is like an optimal location for like people that work in the city.
Well, that's just it.
So
If
I
I
feel
was
like-
living in Hoboken, I would probably also be working
Okay.
in the city, and I would be theoretically making that wage where I would be able to make $1,000 a month. But I probably wouldn't have savings as a result. And so if I wanted to have,
I think you need more than $1,000 a month for rent.
Yeah.
you'd be surprised. All right, just
Really?
I wouldn't say. I never said it was
All
like
you gotta
a
do
good
is suck the
apartment.
landlord
Hot
and get
take.
$1,000 a month.
Yeah,
Increase
get some
public
suck
transit.
points.
But
Is that really a hot
the
take?
problem
Yeah,
was
it
like
is. Really?
low wage
Think about it, if you're
workers.
rich, do you use public transit? But if you're actually like poor and can get to a job that like is further from you because public transit is actually good and cheap, like yeah.
That's fair.
I don't know. I'd have to actually look over my talking points again because I kind of bullshitted that essay.
I thought it was good.
I put effort
I remember
in.
you were mad. You were like, I'm writing this essay analyzing the strategies that the author uses to bring her point across, but I don't actually get to propose a solution to this problem.
Yeah, that was my main problem.
Yeah,
that
that
was
was
the
your-
problem with that class. We were more focused on identifying problems than doing anything about
Yeah,
them.
it was like, literature that points out these problems in society, but doesn't actually suggest it.
I mean, finding out what the problems are is half the
important,
battle.
it's half
Because
the
if you
battle,
don't
yeah.
know, if you don't know what the problems are, you're not going to be able to fix anything. But then again, no one's picking up the slack and doing the other half. Because this lady dropped whatever she was doing. She dropped her life to live as like a low wage
No wage worker, yeah.
She gave
thought that
herself
was
like
interesting.
$500 safety net, and then she just moved out, found a house, got a low wage job, and then just lived like that for like a year. And it was like her health deteriorated, like she was like miserable all the time, and like she was normally like able to afford a house on her own as a writer, and she just like went and did this thing, and she was able to get some perspective. And now she dropped what she was doing to find out just how bad the problem was. Now, like, obviously that's a good thing because she's able to like immerse herself and actually understand the full scope of the problem. But now you don't have people who are actually going out and doing anything about
But
it.
I think the reason for that is because maybe you can write up a proposal or some sort of solution, but then I think implementing it, there's some third step in there that's implementing it, and I think that's a lot harder. There's so much else that needs to go into it besides just like, I'm writing a possible solution. It's like, okay, now get that implemented, get litigation passed that like will allow this to come into play, get people on your side. I think that takes a lot more than people realize, regardless of if you have a solution.
All right. So let's move forward from this. Like, let's talk universal basic income. Sean, what do you think?
Ooh, that's an interesting
I know.
one.
I know.
It's hot button. It's a hot button topic, and I know you're looking at me like a filthy communist.
He pointed
The
to
thing
Andrew.
is just, like, that's fucking expensive as shit. And also, like, I understand where it's coming from, but I feel like that's only applicable at a point where people don't need to work jobs anymore. You know what I mean? Like, when like, machines are doing most of the work. But, like, when unemployment is extremely low right now, like, I don't think... And also, that's expensive as shit. Like, how much money are you giving everybody?
Yeah, my gut feel
I
is...
think
There's a
it would
lot of
come
people
out
in
to
this
like
country.
50. No, I was thinking new minimum wage. It would depend. It would be as much or slightly more than welfare now, because the whole idea of universal basic income would be to phase out welfare.
I still feel like that's
The revenue,
really expensive.
the revenue you need to derive has to come from somewhere. So either one, everyone just taxes everywhere increase.
The problem is like
You'd have to
We
increase
cut
everyone's
other
taxes.
stuff
like-
that's kind of useless.
yeah, you would have to cut things that
I like
are
bridges.
useless, but the hardest thing is
Oh,
choosing
wait.
what's useless. Do you feel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Healthcare.
By universal basic income, do you mean
Who needs
everyone would
health?
get paid the same amount?
Yeah. So
Oh, wait.
theoretically,
Public
If
education.
if you're
Wait, sorry.
if you're
Yeah.
employed
Different
and
definitions here.
Yeah, see, that's what I was wondering.
if you're employed and you're making an income that is above universal basic income,
Oh,
you
so
do not
get it.
redeem universal basic income, or it like your income would like be brought up to match that.
So in this sense, are you saying universal basic income?
Yeah,
is
but
So
like,
then
say
it's-
if universal
no, but
basic
then
income was
you- no, but then it's
$30,000
like-
a year,
Yeah.
right? Because that is like enough to like
This just
live
sounds
in
like
like
welfare.
North Carolina,
Yeah.
right?
This is well.
This is just welfare.
D-
then.
Yeah.
It's really not
universal
because
basic
welfare
You're
is
just
for
giving it to
people who are
people.
unemployed.
this
Okay.
is for
Universal
people who are-
basic income would be an income in addition to whatever you're making already.
So what is
Okay, but then what about the people who are just barely above the cutoff point?
what is the difference
Then
between this
there'd
and
be
minimum
no-
wage?
Then
Well, that's
they
just it.
shouldn't
I think
work a job.
I think the whole point is
that's
to
that hard.
choose a point that would be like the universal basic income would cover a minimum livable wage or a minimum livable income per year.
And
And
then
if
if you
you
wanna-
happen to exceed that, then obviously you're already at a livable income and you don't need the income. But if you are a person who is living up to your means, but then you get this additional income. So say you're working minimum wage and you're affording a room where the rent is like $200 a month, right? If you get universal basic income, you're also getting more money that would allow you to put stuff in savings. So it would theoretically also remove this bubbling effect that's happening with Social Security. Not as much money would need to be pooled into Social Security by the government because, and like that would also go to universal basic income because people are now able to live comfortably enough or afford housing and basic necessities and not have to rely on government spending as much. Because if they have a universal basic income, they don't have to worry about all their money going toward house and food, or even just food. Because if you're homeless, you're basically just living meal to meal, and you can't think too much about how to get a job if you're just trying to get to your next meal. The whole point of a universal basic income would try to bring everyone up to the same level and then permit people to move above that, providing for the people who aren't there yet, and then letting the people who are there just like keep moving up.
So is this...
I don't know. It's a good idea.
I see what you're saying,
I like it, but at
And
the same time, so many things need to be gutted and changed on the drop of a hat that
That's
just
the
probably
other
isn't
thing.
feasible.
It wouldn't be all at once.
Yeah.
Like this is the other argument with raising minimum wage. If you wanted to raise minimum wage in New Jersey from $8.60 an hour to $15, you're not going to do it all at once. That's stupid. That's crazy.
that
It's
doesn't-
ludicrous.
the problem,
you
you
wouldn't
can't just,
implement UBI, universal basic income. I'm just going to say UBI.
Yeah,
You wouldn't
yeah,
implement
that's-
it all at once. It would be like a very gradual thing with a deadline, so you'd be able to break it up over a number of years.
I'm curious though about, okay, let's say for example we decided that UBI is what, 30,000 a year. So anyone who makes less,
I would say 40.
That's
okay,
I would
let's
say 40 because
number doesn't matter right now, but just let's say 40,000 a year. So someone who makes 25,000 a year, they're going to get that extra 15,000 that's going to bring them up, right?
yeah.
What about someone who makes exactly 40,000? How do you think they feel that they're putting in maybe more work than this other person, and yet they're still receiving the same?
I mean, that's gonna happen no matter what you do. Like, it just
No, if you didn't have universal basic income, that person who had a $40,000 a year job, they would be making more money, and maybe they'd be putting in more work, or maybe their work would be harder, or maybe they need a college degree for their work.
This is like arguing about minimum wage, saying that like
No, it's
minimum
the
wage
exact
shouldn't
same thing
exist.
with welfare. It's like, if I'm gonna get off welfare and my job isn't gonna pay me and welfare pays me more, I'll just stay on welfare.
Because then
It's
that's
the same-
Also,
Because then why would
because you're-
anyone go to college? Why would anyone be incentivized to work a $40,000 a year job when they're like, well, I could just work a $25,000 a year job that
And
maybe is
still
less
get a
work, less
$40,000.
hours, and still get $40,000.
That's what I was
a
trying
year.
to say before.
Yeah.
It's the same problem as welfare.
UBI is like...
It's a similar problem to welfare, and I may be portraying this wrong. But because welfare is provided to people who
I actually
are...
just some fun analysis real quick. I had to go look it up to make sure I was actually thinking. So New Jersey is kind of unique, and this might be a pseudo blink in here. Every year we have to reevaluate our minimum wage. Because we basically passed an amendment that says like every year based on the consumer price index, which is a context of like inflation, our minimum wage increases in proportion to the CPI increases. So like basically every year if inflation's gone up, our minimum wage automatically goes up. So for current example, it's $8.44, I think. Maybe it's $8.50, I don't remember exactly.
I think it's $8.60 actually.
Well, it goes up to $8.60 on January 1st because of the CPI inflation rates. Yeah. So point being, like, I don't know, this could be integrated easily in a context of like UBI, where it's like maybe UBI is like linked to a inflation rate and also based on the area you're living. Because I think, like, for example, like a UBI needed to live in New York City, it's very different than UBI needed to live in like Wyoming.
Each will get according
also-
to their need.
This would probably... Yeah, that's probably it, where it would be on a state-by-state basis, because the cost of living...
You know, that's just communism, right?
Straight up communism.
That's literally like word for word communism. Every man
Communism
gets-
is an equal distribution of goods across all peoples. But, like, UBI allows people to have an equal baseline.
Yeah, because if it were truly communist,
Because if you're
every
making
single person would get
$100,000 a year,
40,000.
there's no reason for you to need a universal basic income because you're already above the universal basic income. You're just making an income at that point.
No,
This-
I'm saying. Whatever.
Am I explaining this wrong?
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe.
it sounds like you're just
No.
It sounds
welfare.
like welfare,
It kind of is.
And it has
But
the
it's
same. It is just
different.
welfare minus.
It's a different form
Because
of
you said
welfare.
it's welfare is just for people who are don't have a
Unemployed.
job, but this seems to be for people who don't have a job and people who don't make
Yes.
enough money. So that's even more expensive.
I'm probably explaining it wrong then, and that's on me.
It's just like,
Yeah, it's
I don't know. I'm just
yeah,
generally
it's
not
just
a
being
fan
said
of
wrong. Like it's
government redistribution. So
Theoretically, I think the redistribution would be proportional, which very communist. It sounds very communist.
so-
Kurt's the guy had a
Kurt's
good
Zach, yeah.
whatever.
I
They had a
watched-
good
I
video
watched it.
about it. I
is that?
recommend that.
it's,
Um,
like
in a
a
nutshell.
Swedish
I would just
channel, and they,
contextualize it in
just-
context of like where is the money
do,
coming
like,
from in order to
explanations of
like
stuff.
pay for it.
That's
I don't think it's necessarily coming from like cuts. I think it's coming from increased taxes. The trade-off associated with this though
always
comes in the
increased
context of the Laffer curve. By increasing the actual tax rate, you decrease the overall tax income because individuals with the capacity to just leave who are higher capital earners can just take their money and move elsewhere. So for example, like if for example my corporate income tax goes from 20% to 40%, I now just work in Canada because it's cheaper. Although I'm further away from the market I want to be in, it means I can now like afford to actually operate my business. So like there's always a trade-off associated with trying to tax the upper incomes that is really hard to quantify. Just as like a caveat, like I think sometimes it gets blown out of proportion. It's like if we raise the tax rate by like 5%, we lose 80% of business. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's hard to quantify. An economist might be able to do this better. I'm not an economist. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's just like
Sounded pretty communist.
that was the complete opposite of communism.
Yeah, it was like, hey,
he
this
was
isn't gonna
arguing
work.
the opposite side that you.
I wasn't
doing
paying attention.
Any kind of like
I agree, though.
redistribution.
It's not a
you have to
perfect system.
increase like everyone's taxes, and if you're gonna increase people's taxes, you're just gonna leave.
Yeah,
That's like the
The other
problem. With, that's like the
here's-
problem with corporate tax rates. Like when they're really high, people just don't do business here. They go to other places.
That's another
And then
that's
we end
another
up losing
issue.
money.
Yeah. The other thing we have to worry about is metropolitan properties being bought by people offshore. Like there's a lot of properties in New York City, and like the values of properties are really really high because there are like Chinese people who just buy the properties and then don't use them. Just like
Oh, okay.
and then like it jacks up the price of all the properties, and then the people who live there all the time, they kind of get screwed over because they're now paying a higher living rate.
I mean, like what's the solution to that then?
It's hard to say.
Like, I mean, are you just gonna say like Chinese people can't buy these houses, or you have to like live in the house if you're gonna buy it? But then, like, there's not really like a solution to that. I feel that's other than you're not allowed to buy this because you don't live here.
Yeah,
kind of
it's
thing. But it's just like
it's a difficult
they're buying
it's a
it
difficult
as
situation.
like an investment more so.
Yeah, they're investing in real estate.
Yeah.
But then like
I mean, you can't say. I mean, it's either they can do it or they can't. I see what you're doing.
Yeah, Chris and Andrew have been making intense eye contact for the past like 5 minutes.
yeah.
Yes. We're
All right.
I feel like I was going to say something about minimum wage.
Minimum
like
wages
when you're taking, the thing is with minimum wages, you can't just increase everyone's pay because the company will just say, "Oh, we have to increase everyone's pay from 8 to 15. We'll
Yeah,
just
cut.
have less people."
Cut, yeah.
And then
That was a
that's
really
even
large
worse. That's
point.
worse.
They won't do it overnight. It would not never in a million years would they ever implement a change from 8 to 15
8 to 15.
overnight.
I mean, Amazon did that, but I guess they have. I don't really.
But
know.
they're a
I don't
corporation.
know what
This isn't
their-
like an entire state.
Yeah.
Like a New Jersey with a state of like 9 million people, most densely populated place, isn't going to jump, like, isn't going to have like a doubling in pay overnight. That's ludicrous. It doesn't make sense. So